Hello, GCF. This is Lisa Darrow coming to you again with this week's community group questions. We're into the second week of our Advent series called Fear Not. And Pastor Ronjo talked this week about Joseph's story in the Christmas story, when the angel comes to him and announces the birth of Jesus, or the coming birth of Jesus. And I love that Pastor Ronjo mentioned how relatable Joseph is, because if we think about him and all the characters of the story, he's probably the most relatable. He's just your average guy who gets wanting to get married, wanting to start a family, but getting confronted with this very out of the ordinary opportunity, but very extraordinary opportunity as well. And so Ronjo talked about how God takes Joseph through this journey of moving from his own fear and into his calling. And the three steps of that Pastor Ronjo talked about was, one, first, God exposes Joseph's fear. So the angel comes to him and says, Joseph, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, even though you know that she is now pregnant. And he would have been very scared and intimidated by this, because he would have thought that she cheated on him. He would have thought that if he allows himself to take her as his wife, he would be brought into the same kind of shame and disgrace that he thought, was going to cover the whole situation. But the angel says, don't be afraid of that. Don't shrink away from this opportunity, because it isn't all what you think it is. This isn't a case of Mary cheating on you at all. Mary is pregnant by the Holy Spirit, and the child she is going to have is going to be the Messiah that you have been waiting for. So first he exposes Joseph's fear to help him confront it directly. The second thing that he does with Joseph is that he casts new vision for Joseph. And this is a really important step, because we need fresh vision in our lives if we're going to move beyond fear, because we have to find something else to motivate us. So God gives him this big picture of what he has this opportunity to be a part of, and says, Joseph, I want you to be the earthly father of the one that you've been waiting for. And more than just resting in fear, God is casting vision for Joseph, in that he's bringing to mind all of the hopes and dreams that he's always had. He's been waiting for the Messiah. All of Israel has been waiting for the Messiah to bring healing and restoration back to Israel. And God is telling him he gets to be an integral part of that. And so that's God casting vision for him and making him see that God's going to be bigger than his fear. As big as his fears may be, God's going to be bigger. And the third thing God does is God gives direction for Joseph. So once he's exposed the fear and he's cast new vision, God gives Joseph the practical and everyday direction that he's going to need. So the first thing he tells Joseph is that go ahead and take Mary as your wife, and you are to name him Jesus, because he is going to save his people from their sins. And even later on in the story, God keeps guiding Joseph step by step. Eventually, King Herod takes advantage of these wise men who want to come and worship this Messiah that has been born. But Herod decides that he wants to use them to kill this Messiah, whoever he may be. And an angel comes later to warn Joseph about this. And Joseph is told to flee into Egypt while this is happening, in order to save the baby's life. And he does. He saved Jesus's life because of this, because of following God's direction. And then God comes to him a couple years later and says it's safe to move back home. And Joseph follows direction again. So God doesn't leave Joseph hanging at any point. He's guiding Joseph step by step by offering him direction. And so the questions that we have for this week are going to follow kind of those 3 points. So your first question is the icebreaker. And go ahead and share with each other both a general fear that you have and a life fear that you have. Now, a general fear, as I'm calling it, is anything that, is kind of general, that kind of those general fears you always think about. Like it could be a fear of spiders or of snakes, like Pastor Ronjo is afraid of, or a fear of the dark, even, or a fear of heights. So something that you've dealt with in your life that is a general fear like that, share one of those. And then also, but not just that, share a life fear that you've encountered. And a life fear can be something that you've found yourself to be intimidated by in a big or a small way over the course of your life. Or maybe you found that you have a fear of change when it encounters your life. Or maybe you have a fear of being open and vulnerable with people. Maybe you have a specific fear that you're facing right now in your life. Go ahead and share like those two things, a general fear and a life fear, with each other. And just know that you are in very good company, because we all face fears like this. Your second question goes back to this idea of God casting new vision for us to help us face down fear. He always casts fear to give us a greater motivation to move beyond fear and into the more wonderful things of our calling. So talk about a time that you were able to move beyond fear because you were given a fresh vision or a fresh motivation to take the right steps. And think about how good God is to cast vision in our lives like that. So recall something like that. Recall a memory of God casting vision in your life so that you could overcome a fear. Your third question touches on that final step of God moving us from fear and into calling. So after God moves us, after God exposes our fear and then casts vision for us, it's all about allowing God to give us direction and actually following through on that direction. So what are some steps that God might be calling you to take right now? What are some steps that God might be calling you to take into your calling? And how can your community group come around you and support you as you follow God's direction step by step? Remember, God didn't overwhelm Joseph with everything all at once and all the direction at once. He was there with Joseph, walking with him step by step. And that's really, really comforting. So how can even your community group come around you? Share those things, the needs that you have in your life, and how the people around you might be able to support you in those steps that God is giving you. Those are your questions for this week. I hope you've enjoyed your discussions together. Fear not, everyone. God will continue to show us how to move from fear and into calling. And I pray over the rest of this Advent season and into Christmas, that you will find the wonderful things that He is moving you toward.